There is something you want, not vaguely, specifically. You have wanted it long enough that you know its exact shape, what it would look like, what it would feel like, what your life would be on the morning after it arrived. And there is a gap between where you are now and where that desire lives. A gap that may have existed for months, for years, perhaps for so long, that you have quietly begun to wonder whether the Wunder, the Favor, or the Rayen. Wanting is the real thing, and the having was always just a story you told yourself. Every self-help system you have ever encountered has offered you a method for closing this gap. A strategy, a habit, a morning routine, a vision board, a productivity framework, a set of goals broken into measurable steps. Some of these have helped partially, temporarily. None of them have closed the gap in the way that felt complete and permanent and genuinely yours. Alfred Adler believed he understood why not because the strategies were wrong, but because they were addressing the wrong level of the problem. The gap between your desire and your reality, Adler argued, is not primarily a gap of information or effort or planning or even discipline. It is a gap of identity, a gap between who you currently understand yourself to be and who you would need to understand yourself to be in order for the desire to exist, not as something you are reaching toward, but as something you are living from. And that gap cannot be closed by doing more. It can only be closed by becoming different in a specific, precise, psychologically grounded sense that Adler spent 40 years of clinical work defining. Today, I want to take you through what Adler discovered about the relationship between desire, identity, and the specific psychological mechanism that either keeps the gap open forever or closes it. From the inside, this is not a manifesting video. It is not a law of attraction video. It is a depth psychology video, rooted in one of the most rigorous and least understood frameworks in the history of human psychology, about the specific interior work that makes desire fulfillable. And it includes a 4-minute practice, a specific, daily, Adlerian practice that, applied consistently, begins to dissolve the identity gap that is the real reason most desires remain perpetually out of reach. But before the practice, the understanding, because in Adler's framework, as in all genuine depth psychology, the practice without the understanding is a ritual without roots. And roots are precisely what makes transformation last. Asterisk. Adler's framework for understanding human desire begins with a concept that is simultaneously simple and profound. The fictional final goal. Every human being, Adler argued, operates from an unconscious vision of a future self, a specific image of who they would need to be in order to finally feel complete, capable, worthy, and fully at home in their own life. This image is not a plan. It is not a deliberate ambition. It is a felt sense formed very early in life of the destination that all striving is aimed toward. He called it fictional not because it is false, but because it is a creation of the psyche. A story the self tells itself about where it is going and who it will be when it arrives. This fictional final goal, this something extraordinary. It organizes the entire personality around itself. Every decision, every relationship, every ambition and retreat is shaped by the unconscious orientation toward this image. The person moves through life like a compass needle pointing toward magnetic north, consistently, powerfully, and largely without knowing that the needle exists. Now here is where desire enters. When you want something, genuinely want it, not as an idle preference, but as a deep and persistent longing. Adler would say that what you are actually wanting is not the thing itself. You are wanting the feeling of the self that would have that thing, the specific experience of identity that the fulfillment would produce. The person who wants financial abundance is not, at the deepest level, wanting money. They are wanting the feeling of being someone for whom scarcity is not a governing reality. The person who wants a genuine, loving relationship is not wanting a partner. They are wanting the feeling of being someone who is genuinely worthy of being known and chosen. The person who wants creative success is not wanting the achievement. They are wanting the feeling of being someone whose inner life has found a genuine form of expression in the world. The desire is always, at its root, an identity desire. A desire for a specific way of experiencing the self. And this is precisely why most desires go unfulfilled despite genuine effort, because the effort is directed at the external goal, while the identity, the unconscious self-image that determines what the psyche considers possible and appropriate for a person like you, remains unchanged. Adler observed this pattern with consistent precision across decades of clinical work. The person who strives for financial success while carrying an unconscious identity organized around scarcity will sabotage every gain. Not consciously, not deliberately, but systematically, because the unconscious identity maintains a powerful pull toward the familiar, toward the version of reality that matches who the psyche has decided this person fundamentally is. He called this the lifestyle, the comprehensive, largely unconscious belief system about the self, about others, and about what the world will allow for a person of this particular kind. And the lifestyle, he argued, is more powerful than any external strategy because it operates beneath the level at which strategy can reach. You can set the goal. You can build the habit. You can follow the plan with genuine discipline. And the lifestyle will redirect you. Subtly, consistently, and with a logic so familiar it feels like fate. Until you make the unconscious conscious. Until you see the lifestyle clearly, including the specific self-image at its center, and begin the deliberate, courageous work of revising it. This revision is what Adler called lifestyle change. And it is, in his clinical experience, the only form of change that is both genuine and lasting, not change at the level of behavior. Change at the level of the story the self tells about who it fundamentally is and what it is, therefore, capable of experiencing. The form and a practice I will give you today is not a shortcut around this work. Nothing is a shortcut around this work. It is a daily tool for doing this work, for repeatedly, deliberately, and with genuine psychological engagement. Introducing the psyche to the identity it is moving toward, until that identity becomes familiar enough to be inhabited. Because in Adler's psychology, as in all genuine depth psychology, the interior must precede the exterior. The self that experiences the fulfillment must exist as a felt reality, not as a concept, before the fulfillment can arrive and remain. Let me be specific about what Adler meant by the identity gap, because it is the most important concept in this entire exploration, and the one most likely to produce genuine recognition if you have been struggling with a desire that effort alone has not fulfilled. The identity gap is the distance between your current self-image and the self-image of the person for whom your desired reality would be normal. Let that settle for a moment. Not the person who achieves the desire through exceptional effort. The person for whom the desired reality is simply their normal experience of life. The person who has genuine financial abundance does not experience it as an achievement. They experience it as the natural expression of who they are and how they move through the world. The person in a deeply loving relationship does not experience the relationship as a triumph over loneliness. They experience love as the natural quality of their relational life. The person whose creative work is genuinely expressed and received does not experience it as a victory. They experience creative expression as simply what they do. The difference between these people and the person who is striving for the same realities is not primarily a difference of effort, intelligence, strategy, or luck. It is a difference of unconscious self-concept. The person for whom abundance is normal carries, at the level of their deepest self-understanding, an identity organized around sufficiency rather than scarcity. Not necessarily consciously. Not necessarily as a belief they could articulate. As a felt sense of who they are and what their life is like. The striving person carries the opposite. Not as a conscious belief. Most people who are striving for abundance do not consciously believe they do not deserve it. At the unconscious level, at the level of the lifestyle that Adler identified, the self-image is organized around a different reality. And this organization is so deep and so automatic that no amount of surface-level effort can consistently override it. Adler documented this with clinical precision in case after case. The patient who came to him wanting to change their external circumstances almost always discovered, in the process of genuine therapeutic work, that what needed to change first was their internal self-narrative. The narrative that said, "People like me do not have that." The narrative that said, "I am the kind of person for whom this is difficult." The narrative that said, "When things are going well, something will go wrong, because things going well is not what my life is like." These narratives were not chosen. They were formed, mostly before the age of 6, by a child interpreting their earliest experiences with the only tools they had. And they have been running, quietly and powerfully, beneath every conscious effort at change ever since. Here is the specific mechanism of the identity gap in practice. When you set a goal or pursue a desire from the current self-image, from the identity of the person who does not yet have the thing, your unconscious psyche treats the pursuit as a deviation from the norm. And the psyche's primary drive is toward consistency, toward the maintenance of the self-image that it considers most fundamentally true. So it corrects, not through dramatic sabotage, through the 1,000 small redirections that feel, from the inside, like distraction or resistance, or simply the way things are. The email that doesn't get sent, the conversation that doesn't happen, the opportunity that arrives and somehow passes without being taken. This is not weakness. It is not a character flaw. It is the psyche doing precisely what it is designed to do, maintaining consistency with the self-image it holds as most fundamentally true. The solution, in Adler's framework, is not to push harder against the correction. It is to change the self-image that the correction is serving, to make the desired reality part of the identity that the psyche is, working to maintain rather than a deviation from it. And this is precisely what the 4-minute practice is designed to do. Alfred Adler introduced one of the most powerful and most misunderstood therapeutic techniques in the history of psychology. He called it acting as if. The misunderstanding is almost always the same. People hear acting as if and interpret it as a form of pretending, of performing a version of yourself that you do not genuinely feel, of fake it until you make it in its most superficial form. This is precisely the opposite of what Adler meant. Acting as if, in Adler's framework, is not a performance. It is a deliberate interior orientation. It is the practice of genuinely engaging with the present moment from the perspective of the identity you are moving toward, not pretending to be that person, but actually inhabiting their way of seeing, feeling, and responding to reality for a specific bounded period of time, with full psychological intention. The distinction is everything. Performance is external. It changes what you show to others while leaving the interior unchanged. Acting as if, in Adler's sense, it is internal. It temporarily inhabits the interior experience of the person you are becoming, and in doing so, introduces the psyche to a new experience of itself that it can begin to recognize as real. Adler used this technique extensively in his clinical work. He would ask patients who felt incapable, or unworthy, or fundamentally limited in some domain, to spend specific periods of time, initially very short, perhaps minutes, acting as if they were the kind of person who had the quality or capability they lacked, not performing it for others, living it internally for themselves. What he observed consistently was something that he considered among the most significant clinical findings of his career. When a person genuinely inhabits a different self-image, even briefly, even imperfectly, the psyche does not immediately reject it as false. It explores it. It tries it on. And if the inhabiting is done with sufficient genuineness and repetition, something in the deep self begins to recognize the new self-image as a possibility rather than an impossibility. This recognition, the shift from impossibility to possibility, in the deep self is the beginning of lifestyle change. And it is, in Adler's framework, the prerequisite for the external changes that genuine desire, fulfillment requires, because the external world responds to the self-image we carry with a consistency that is, once you see it, both obvious and astonishing. The person who carries the self-image of someone for whom abundance is natural makes different micro-decisions than the person who carries the self-image of someone for whom scarcity is the governing reality. Not necessarily larger decisions. The 1,000 small daily choices, how they price their work, how they respond to opportunity, how they carry themselves in professional interactions. All of these are quietly shaped by the self-image operating beneath conscious awareness. Change the self-image. And these micro-decisions begin to change. Without deliberate effort, without conscious strategy, as a natural expression of who the psyche now understands itself to be. This is the mechanism behind the 4-minute practice. Not magic, not the law of attraction in any mystical sense. Pure, rigorous, clinically grounded Adlerian psychology applied to the specific task of closing the identity gap that keeps desire perpetually out of reach. Before I give you the practice, I want to address the most common objection Adler himself encountered when he explained this method. The objection was this: if I act as if I am already the person who has what I want, am I not deceiving myself? Am I not pretending something is true that is not yet true? Adler's answer was both precise and liberating. He said, the self-image that is currently preventing you from having what you desire is also not the truth. It is a story, formed early, repeated endlessly, and mistaken for reality. You are not choosing between truth and fiction. You are choosing between two fictions, one that limits you and one that expands you. The question is not which self-image is more accurate in the present moment. The question is which self-image is more aligned with who you genuinely are and who you are genuinely capable of becoming. And Adler's clinical experience across thousands of patients was that almost universally, the limiting self-image was less accurate than it felt. That the story of fundamental incapacity or unworthiness was a child's conclusion, formed without sufficient evidence, and maintained past its usefulness by the sheer force of repetition. Acting as if is not deception. It is the deliberate introduction of a more accurate story, a story that is not yet fully inhabited, but that is more genuinely true to the person's actual capacity than the story it is replacing. The 4-minute Adlerian practice I am about to describe is drawn directly from Adler's therapeutic method, adapted for daily individual practice. It consists of 4 phases, each lasting approximately 1 minute. Practice daily, ideally at the same time each day. Ideally in the morning before the mind is fully engaged with the day's demands. It begins to produce observable changes in self-perception within 2 to 3 weeks of consistent practice. Before you begin, there is one essential preparation. You must identify your desire with precision, not the external outcome, the interior experience. Not what you want to have, but how you want to feel as the person who has it. Sit with this for a moment before the first practice session and get as specific as possible. Write it down if that helps. The more precisely you can identify the interior feeling of the fulfilled self, the more effective the practice will be. Minute 1. The honest inventory. For the first minute, you sit quietly with your current self-image in relation to the desire, not judging it, not trying to change it immediately, simply seeing it clearly. What does the voice in your head say about you and this desire? What is the story your psyche currently tells about whether this is available for a person like you? What are the specific words of the limiting self-image? The words that arise when you allow yourself to think honestly about whether you genuinely expect to have this. Adler was clear that this honest inventory is not a form of negative self-talk to be indulged. It is a clinical observation. You are simply seeing what is there, without judgment, so that you can work with it consciously, rather than having it work on you unconsciously. Notice the story. Name it as a story. Something like, this is the story my psyche currently tells about this desire. Not the truth. A story. This naming is itself a small but significant act of psychological freedom. Minute 2. The identity bridge. In the second minute, you deliberately construct what Adler called the identity bridge, the specific, felt sense of who you would be if the desire were already your normal reality. This is not visualization in the sense of imagining external circumstances. It is identity inhabitation. You are not picturing the bank account, or the relationship, or the creative achievement. You are inhabiting the interior experience of the self that lives in that reality naturally. Ask yourself, how does this person wake up in the morning? What is their relationship to their own capabilities? How do they move through difficulty, not without difficulty, but in relationship to it? What is the quality of their self-trust? How do they make decisions? What do they expect from themselves and from the world? Let the answers come from genuine interior exploration rather than from intellectual construction. You may be surprised to discover that you already know this person, that the self-image of the fulfilled version of you is more accessible than the limiting story has allowed you to believe. Inhabit this person's interior experience as genuinely as you can for the full minute, not performing them, being them briefly, internally, with full psychological intention. Minute 3. The acting as if decision. In the third minute, you make a specific, concrete decision about how you will act as if today. Not a grand gesture, a micro decision, one specific, small, actionable choice that the fulfilled version of you would make naturally and that the current self-image would resist or redirect. If your desire involves abundance, perhaps it is responding to an opportunity with the confidence of someone who knows their value. Perhaps it is responding to an opportunity with the confidence of someone who knows their value, rather than with the hesitation of someone managing scarcity. If your desire involves connection, perhaps it is initiating a genuine conversation rather than waiting to be approached. If your desire involves creative expression, perhaps it is spending 20 minutes on the work, without needing to produce anything, perfect or complete. The acting as if decision should be small, enough to actually do today, and specific enough that you will know whether you did it. Write it down. The act of committing it to writing moves it from the interior practice into the external domain, where identity change becomes visible as behavioral change. Adler's clinical observation was that this third phase, the translation of interior identity shift into one specific concrete external action, is the most critical of all four, because the psyche changes not only through interior practice, but through the direct experience of itself acting differently. Each small acting as if decision provides the psyche with direct evidence against the limiting story. And direct evidence, accumulated over time, is more powerful than any affirmation or visualization alone. Minute 4. The contribution anchor. The fourth minute is unique to the Adlerian framework and distinguishes this practice from every other self-image or manifestation practice I am aware of. In the fourth minute, you connect your desire to its contribution. You ask, if this desire were fulfilled, if this version of me were fully real and fully inhabiting the life I am moving toward, what would I be able to give? What would I be able to contribute to the people around me, to the work I am here to do, to the specific corner of the human community that will be most affected by my fulfilled self? This is not altruism as self-motivation. It is Adler's deepest psychological insight, applied to the practice of desire. Fulfillment, the self-image organized around, receiving around the desire as something the self will have, maintains its separation from the fulfilled state, precisely because receiving is always something that happens to you, always something that requires the external world to cooperate, But contribution, giving, creating, offering, is something you can do from the interior right now. Regardless of external circumstances, the person who connects their desire to its contribution shifts the psychological orientation from lack toward fullness, from waiting to receive toward beginning to give from the identity that receiving would produce. And this shift from the psychology of waiting to the psychology of contribution is in Adler's clinical experience one of the most reliably effective moves in the entire repertoire of identity change. And the 4 minutes by holding the contribution image, the specific picture of what your fulfilled self gives to the world for its final moments. Let it settle into the body as a felt sense rather than a concept. Then open your eyes and do the one acting as if decision you identified in minute 3. Adler was specific about the timeline of genuine lifestyle change. He did not believe in instant transformation. He believed in the cumulative effect of daily, deliberate, psychologically engaged practice over a period, sufficient for the unconscious self-image to begin treating the new identity as familiar, rather than foreign. His clinical experience suggested that 21 days of consistent daily practice was the minimum threshold for producing the first genuine shift in self-perception. Not the completion of the work. Lifestyle change at the deepest level is the work of years. But the first observable, felt shift in how the self relates to the desired reality, the first experience of the possibility beginning to feel more like a natural home than an aspiration. Here is what to expect across the 21 days. In the first 7 days, the practice will often feel effortful and slightly artificial. The identity bridge will be difficult to inhabit genuinely. The limiting story will reassert itself quickly after each session. The acting as if decision will sometimes not get done. This is not failure. This is the psyche encountering a new story for the first time and doing what it always does with new input, testing it against the familiar. Do not abandon the practice during this period. The effort and artificiality are evidence that the practice is reaching the right level. Surface-level practices feel immediately comfortable. Deep practices feel effortful precisely because they are working. In the second 7 days, something begins to shift. The identity bridge becomes more accessible. The inhabited self-image of the fulfilled version of you becomes more specific and more genuinely felt. The acting as if decision begins to produce direct experiences, small ones, imperfect ones, of yourself actually operating from the new identity. These experiences are enormously important. Collect them. Write them down. They are the direct evidence against the limiting story that the psyche needs in order to revise it. Notice also the resistance that arises during this second week. The unconscious self-image, recognizing that genuine change is occurring, will generate its own counter-pressure. Old thoughts, old patterns, old situations that pull toward the familiar. This resistance is not evidence that the practice is not working. It is evidence that it is working. The psyche does not generate resistance against things that are not moving it. In the third 7 days, the most significant shift occurs. The new self-image begins to feel less like something you are trying to inhabit and more like something you already, in certain moments, genuinely are. You will notice this not as a dramatic transformation, but as a quality shift in the micro decisions of ordinary life. The opportunity that you take rather than deflect. The value you claim rather than discount. The creative work you begin rather than prepare for. The conversation you initiate rather than wait for. These are not large changes. They are identity changes expressed as behavioral changes. And they accumulate. Each one provides the psyche with more direct evidence of the new self-image being real. And the more evidence accumulates, the more the new self-image becomes the one the psyche works to maintain, replacing the limiting story, not through force, but through the slow, irresistible weight of lived experience. After the 21 days, the practice does not end. The lifestyle revision that Adler considered genuine is not a 21-day project. It is a practice that becomes, over time, simply how you relate to yourself. The 4 minutes remain. The daily acting as if decision remains. The contribution anchor remains. But they become less effortful and more natural. Less a practice you do, and more an expression of who you are becoming, which is, in Adler's framework, exactly the point. Adler always wanted his patients to be able to see change as it happened, to have concrete evidence that the interior work was producing something real in the texture of their daily experience. What follows are 6 signs that the identity is genuinely shifting and the gap is genuinely closing. The first sign is a change in what you notice. The self-image that has been running your perception has been, quite literally, filtering your experience, showing you the evidence that confirms the limiting story and allowing evidence to the contrary to pass unnoticed. As the self-image shifts, the filter changes. You begin noticing opportunities, possibilities, and signals that were always present, but previously invisible to the identity that had no use for them. The second sign is a change in what feels natural. Decisions and actions that previously required conscious effort and felt like reaching outside your normal range begin to feel more like expressions of who you naturally are. This naturalness is the most reliable evidence of genuine identity shift, because the psyche always makes the behavior consistent with identity feel easy, and the behavior inconsistent with it feel effortful. The third sign is a change in the quality of resistance. The resistance you encounter, internal and external, begins to feel less like a stop sign and more like friction. Not the experience of being fundamentally blocked, but the normal experience of movement encountering the natural drag that all movement produces. The difference between these two experiences is profound. One suggests you are not the kind of person who gets through. The other suggests you are simply in the process of getting through. The fourth sign is a change in your relationship with time. The person striving from a limiting self-image experiences desire fulfillment as something in the future, perpetually ahead, never quite arriving. As the self-image shifts toward the fulfilled identity, time begins to feel different. The desired reality begins to feel less like something you are waiting for and more like something you are living into, already partially present, already partially real, already beginning to be the normal quality of your experience rather than its aspired exception. The fifth sign is what Adler considered the most definitive evidence of genuine lifestyle revision. A change in your relationship with setback. The person operating from the limiting self-image experiences setback as confirmation, as evidence that the limiting story was right all along. The person whose self-image has genuinely shifted experiences the same setback as information, a problem to be solved, a course correction to be made, not evidence about who they fundamentally are. This shift from setback as verdict to setback as data is the specific internal experience of a person who has moved from striving toward an identity to living from one. And it is, in every case, Adler documented. The interior shift that most reliably precedes the exterior change that desire fulfillment ultimately represents. Alfred Adler believed, on the basis of 40 years of clinical work with people from every background, every level of education, every form of suffering and aspiration, that the distance between a human being and their genuine desires is almost never a distance of external circumstance. It is a distance of self-concept. Of the story the psyche has accepted as true about who this particular person is and what this particular person's life is therefore capable of containing. And he believed equally firmly, equally on the basis of evidence, that this distance is closable, not by anyone and not instantly, but by anyone willing to do the specific courageous, daily interior work of revising the story that is keeping the gap open. The 4-minute practice is not a promise. It is a tool. Like all tools, its value is entirely dependent on the consistency and genuineness with which it is used. 4 minutes of genuine interior engagement daily over 21 days will produce something real. 4 minutes of mechanical performance will produce very little. What makes the difference is the same thing that makes the difference in everything. Adler studied the quality of genuine engagement, the willingness to actually see the current self-image rather than flinch from it, to actually inhabit the fulfilled self-image rather than merely describe it, to actually make the one acting as if decision and actually do it. Today, however imperfectly, the imperfection is not a problem. It is the point. Identity change does not require perfect execution. It requires genuine, repeated, honest contact with the new self-image, imperfect contact, human contact, the kind that is genuinely yours rather than borrowed from some idealized vision of how transformation is supposed to look. Leave the number 777 in the comments. In the Adlerian framework, 777 represents the alignment of the fictional final goal with genuine action, the specific moment when the interior story and the exterior behavior begin moving in the same direction, toward the same destination. For the first time, if this practice has named something real for you, if you have recognized in this exploration the specific gap between your desire and your current self-image and felt, perhaps for the first time, that it is genuinely closable, leave 777 here. Let this community witness the beginning of your 21 days. Subscribe to Alfred Adler philosophy, because the work of closing the gap between who you are and who you are capable of being is not a video's work. It is the work of a lifetime, and you deserve a companion for every step of it.